This will also be an opportunity for us to hear of practical measures and concrete steps taken to better protect education from attacks during armed conflict and other situations of violence. With that, I'm extremely pleased to be joined today by a distinguished panel who will speak to us about these issues and help us also consider these practical ways to address this growing challenge. So first, I'd like to welcome two youth representatives that are joining us from Afghanistan and Haiti. We both have Ms. Mina Bakshi and Ms. Samar Marcelin Tissier, who will be sharing firsthand their experiences and share their insights as to what needs to be done to better protect education in emergencies. A little bit about Mina and Samar. Mina was born in the Bamiyan province in Afghanistan in 2002. She grew up in Kabul, where she completed her high school education. Prior to that, prior to her evacuation to the US in late 2021, she served as the youth coordinator for the Afghan Red Crescent Society. And currently, Mina is a student at Swarthmore College in Pennsylvania, pursuing a major in peace and conflict studies. Welcome, Mina, to this briefing. I also hope that Samar is able to join us online. Samar was born in the city of Hinch in the heart of Haiti. She is currently living far away from her family at the Salesian Sisters Convent in Port-au-Prince to continue her education. This is despite the challenges, the insecurities, and the increased violence in the capital. She is a UNICEF youth advocate at just the age of 15. And she stands truly as a symbol of hope and a catalyst for change, for positive change. So welcome to Samar. I hope she's online and I hope she can hear us loud and clear. I take this also opportunity to really warmly welcome Ms. Yasmin Sharif, who is the Executive Director of Education Can't Wait. For colleagues who are not familiar with Education Can't Wait, it is the UN's Global Fund for Education in Emergencies and Protracted Crises. Yasmin is a lawyer specializing in IHL and human rights law. She has over 30 years of experience with the UN and NGOs, and she served in some of the most crisis-affected contexts in the world, including in Afghanistan, in DRC, as well as in the Middle East and the Balkans. Welcome, Yasmin. Very, very pleased that you were able to join us today. Joining us also today is Ms. Virginia Gamba. She's the Special Representative of the Secretary General for Children and Armed Conflict. Ms. Gamba assumed this role in April 2017, and she brings more than 30 years of experience and professional leadership on issues related to disarmament, peace, and human security. Welcome, USG Gamba, to our panel. And finally, definitely very delighted to welcome Ms. Susanna Tkalek, who is the Deputy Humanitarian Coordinator for the Democratic Republic of Congo. She's based in Goma, and Susanna assumed this role in July 2021 and brings to this position 20 years of senior humanitarian peace building and development expertise, having led operations in the Middle East, Africa, Asia, Latin America, and Europe. Really, really pleased that we're also joined today by Susanna. So colleagues, as with usual practice, we will first hear brief introductory remarks from our panelists, and then we will open the floor for questions and comments. I really invite you to share your experiences, especially for colleagues that are joining us from the field operations, experiences, advice that will help inform also our work and ensure the cross-fertilization of best practices would be really, really welcome during the Q&A session. So with that, Yasmin, I'd like to turn to you first with the first question. And colleagues, once again, Yasmin is the Executive Director of Education Can't Wait. Yasmin, it would be really great if you can just speak to us a bit about the magnitude of the protection challenges in education in armed conflict and other situations of violence. Are you seeing an upward trend? Would be great to give us a sense of the extent of the challenge we're facing in this area. Over to you, please, Yasmin.
First of all, I would like to thank you, Mervat, and I would like to thank the GCPEA, who is a close partner of Education Cannot Wait, and who is doing a fantastic job, because we really need someone, an organization that keeps track on attacks on schools, on the basis of the Safe School Declaration, and hence also IHL and human rights and other related international convention and laws and resolutions, because often we tend to forget that legal side. And of course, that excites me a lot, because you need to address impunity eventually. And you also need to mobilize political pressure to protect schools from attack, though it's proven very, very difficult. You have governments who are either unable or unwilling to do so. Situation today has got from bad to worse. Let's start with Ukraine, where I just met with the Minister of Education on Monday as we launched our program for Ukraine, a multi-year program. You have, I think, about 4,000 schools that are either destroyed or damaged. The large majority are damaged, but have certainly been attacked, and not just collateral damage. So I'll give it that as just one example. Another example is Myanmar, and we know that the hostilities there are intensifying. And again, civilian objects which are prohibited from being attacked under international humanitarian law, and then specifically under the Safe Schools Declaration, are being attacked. And then, just to make it just a little bit worse, or very much worse, we have a very clear targeting of schools in Gaza. None of these are collateral damages. When schools that are protected objects under international humanitarian law and under the Safe Schools Declaration that most states have actually signed off on, are being attacked systematically, not by one coincidence, but systematically, to the extent that children no longer can attend school for fear of their life, if they so happens just to be alive, as is the case of Gaza. We have the situation of northeast Nigeria, where I was just there a couple of weeks ago, where recently over 200 girls were abducted again from their schools. So here the school was being targeted in the sense that the female students were being abducted. In that sense, because there is no respect for international law and the Safe School Declaration, and here Nigeria, the government of Nigeria, they are one of the signatories to the Safe Schools Declaration, but it's Boko Haram that is attacking the schools, and they're not a signatory. But no one adheres to international law. Sometimes it's the governments, the warring parties, that are attacking the schools. We have seen that in the case of Gaza. And sometimes we have terrorist groups like Boko Haram that are attacking the schools. So yes, the school is meant to be a safe place. I have mentioned Ukraine, I have mentioned Myanmar, Gaza, and northeast Nigeria. I know that you at the GCPEA Secretariat will have all the specific numbers, but I can say that the trend has gone so bad today. It's gone down to the extent that many of us who once upon a time believed that human rights law, the Safe School Declaration, international humanitarian law eventually would bring us all to follow our conscience, and there would be some sort of law enforcement or political pressure, have come to a point where we say, unless we see impunity being addressed in the near future, for all of those places where you have schools and students being attacked, international law and the Safe Schools Declaration is in huge derail, and that is not going to bode very well for the future, because we cannot live in an international world order where attacking a school or abducting girl students have become the new normal norm, which is the case today. So yes, I'm very negative about the trend, but I'm very hopeful with political pressure and by speaking truth to power. we can reverse that trend. And for this, I greatly admire all of you, and especially GCPEA that keeps giving us the evidence-based data, because you always need evidence when you speak up. So I will start off with that. Thank you so very much.
Thank you, Yasmin, for your opening remarks, and again concerning that we're observing a worsening trend when it comes to attacks against schools, children, as well as education facilities. Again, just looking at the statistics here, in at least 28 countries globally, there's a pattern of attacks on education by state security forces and non-state armed groups, while attacks on education were reported in 84 countries globally. So this is just to give a sense of the extent to which this is indeed a big concern. And as you've mentioned, Yasmin, it will not be addressed without political pressure. It will not be addressed without political will, and also for, to hold states as well as also non-state armed groups to account for the violations of IHL and human rights law. Thanks a million, Yasmin, and I'm sure there's going to be quite a few questions from our participants. But before, of course, we do so, I'd like to first turn to Mina. Mina, as mentioned, colleagues, she joins us from Afghanistan. She's a youth representative from Afghanistan, currently living in the US. Thank you, Mina, again, for joining us today and for making the time to share your personal experience, but also that of your friends and colleagues in Afghanistan who are facing challenges in accessing education in the country. So perhaps, Mina, over to you with your insights, please.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much, Marvet. Thank you so much for giving me time to speak today. My name is Mina Bakhshi. I am originally from Afghanistan. I was born in Bamiyan province in Afghanistan, and I grew up in the capital city, Kabul. I was evacuated from Afghanistan a couple of months after the Taliban takeover, and it's been 2 years that I'm living here in the United States. Meanwhile, I want to remind that it's been 2 years since the last time that girls attended school in Afghanistan. The 2 years since the Taliban seized control in Afghanistan have been marked by upheaval, by regression, especially concerning the education of girls and females in Afghanistan. I go to university here in the United States, while my peers in Afghanistan are confined to the walls of their homes, dreaming about going and being able to go to school once again. Education is banned if you are born as a girl in Afghanistan. I graduated from high school in Afghanistan, and I feared going to school every single day. In Afghanistan, where schools were the frequent target of terror and violence, every day brought with it the possibility of another tragedy happening. The mere act of going to school became an act of courage in itself, as students braved and overcame the dangers lurking outside the doors of their classroom. And each and every attack left a trail of devastation, claiming so many innocent lives of students and teachers, and it shattered so many hopes and dreams of countless families. Now I want to walk you through one of the many experiences that I had going to school back in Afghanistan, and just a tragedy that I had experienced living in Afghanistan. One day, as I was sitting in my classroom, just very excited for starting the next chapter along with my other classmates, I was shocked by by hearing this ear-splitting sound. It's very hard to describe. It's indescribable. The chaos was just, it was very chaotic. In another moment, I found myself on the alley looking at the terrified faces of people running, rushing, and looking for their dearest among the bodies shattered into pieces. I looked at the truck that was loading dead bodies of students, as their hearts had not just been beating just a moment ago. I want to say that they do not exist anymore. 24 deaths and 57 injuries. One day, so after that, the tragedy, I remember now that I recall after that moment, I just sat in a corner, numb with what I just witnessed. I was really exhausted of everything that was happening surrounding me. All I wanted to do was just to scream as loud as I can. Just let me breathe, let me live, and let me learn. Every time I breathed, I felt lucky to be able to breathe again. I felt lucky to be able to go to school again and learn. I was in my class along with my other classmates the next day of after this tragedy happened. I feared going to school every single day, but I feared not going to school even more. I think that no young person should have to choose between these two fears, but now that is a choice that Afghan girls no longer have. If there is one thing that I would like all the girls and females in Afghanistan, uh, if there's one message that I give them, is for them to have faith and to be hopeful despite all the challenges and frustration. In countries like Afghanistan, where the violence and the instability have long been disrupting the normal life, where especially for girls, where they can pursue education, where they can go to school without fear, where they can participate in society and contribute to their communities. It just seems like an elusive aspiration. But I believe it's vital for all Afghan women and girls to hold on to hope and faith, and to know their inherent value and worth, and to believe in the right to live in dignity and freedom. I think each step taken toward education, each voice raised in advocacy, and each act of defiance against injustice contributes to the collective movement toward a better future. So I want to call on states, the UN agencies, the human rights organization, and the international community to negotiate and to advocate to enable girls and women in Afghanistan and all around the globe to realize their fundamental right and their basic human right to education um, in a protected and safe way. And I ask them to prioritize girls and women's education in their debates and negotiations regarding the current humanitarian crisis happening in Afghanistan. A lot of people ask me what I think about the future of Afghanistan, and what I want to say, and looking at the statistics from other countries in Afghanistan, the future looks uncertain and dark for Afghan girls. And I want you to please bear witness to their suffering. Please raise awareness to their situation and advocate for their protection and their basic human rights, including their access to education. I believe the international organization can play an important role in providing support and resources to empower Afghan girls to advance their rights and their well-being. Thus, I urge you to please recognize and to stop this gender segregation in Afghanistan. I believe every children, all women, every human being should have the opportunity to live, to learn, to grow, to thrive in a world where education is not a privilege, but it's a basic and fundamental human right, where schools are not targets of bombs. And it's a place, but rather schools are a place that's safe, protected, and nurturing for all students. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for giving me time to speak. Thanks.
Nina, I truly can't thank you enough for your heartfelt words, for sharing your personal experience. And I'm really extremely sorry for the difficult experience that you have experienced firsthand, but also that of your peers and your family and your society. What I can say definitely from our end, from the Interagency Standing Committee, we're not giving up. I know at the senior most level, with the executive heads of all of the IASC members, starting with Martin Griffith, who's the Undersecretary General, and the executive heads of UNHCR, UNICEF, the NGOs, everyone is doing everything within their capacity to use whatever leverage or influence they have to reverse the decisions that were made to strip girls in Afghanistan from, as you said, their human right for education. So we stand behind the people of Afghanistan. We stand behind the girls of Afghanistan. And as you've mentioned, it's important to remain optimistic and remain hopeful that change will indeed come. Thank you again, Mina. I really, really appreciate your intervention. And truly, you are an inspiration to me and to all of us online and beyond. Colleagues, perhaps just turning to Samar. Again, Samar joins us from Haiti, from Port-au-Prince. I know the connection is not great. So we have a short video where Samar will have the opportunity to speak a bit also about her experience and how she's able to continue to try to access education despite the challenges being away from her family, the challenges with increasing insecurity and violence in the capital and also across the country. So perhaps we can show the video now, colleagues. Thank you.
Pour un petit monde ta gen bon vie, m'pense que faut pas la de tirer, faut ta vivre dans un bon environnement, côté li pa wè violence, côté juste aider à aider le vivre. Moi-même, m'pense que m'pa supposé de tirer, m'pa supposé wè violence, m'te supposé aller à l'école, pour m'pa rater un jour, pour m'te ka travail m'te ka avancer, pour m'te ka plus éclairci sur l'école. Aujourd'hui, pour faire même fermer, bon, tellement, quand on a tellement de balles à tirer, ça veut dire que nous pas vraiment à l'aise vraiment. Ça veut dire que gain de laisser à terre coucher, nous pas même coucher sur cabane, cause tirer tellement fort et près, nous pas de coucher en l'air parce que cabane est déjà gigant, nous pas de venir coucher en l'air. Pour éducation, ça veut dire me sentir que l'école déjà fini, on regarder là. Parce que moi, presque fait, moi, je pas apprendre rien. Parce que si ça, tu vas dire qu'on l'a vu tout nos épisodes, c'est pas étape, à suivre. Mais pas vraiment stable, vraiment. Bon, parce que pour un petit monde qui a vécu de nos jours, qui j'en ai de vivre, c'est côté qui pas de violence, côté nous pas peut-être de tirer, nous pas peut-être de violence, nous pas pour caoutchouc à bouler, et peut-être éducation, nous sommes plus stable. Nous sommes plus capables d'étudier en sécurité. Nous ne sommes pas de peur, nous ne sommes pas de crainte, nous sommes plus avec content, avec plus joie. Bon, le message que nous fait passer, nous voulons dire que pour autorité ou bien les gens qui dirigent, pour le fond, pour les gens qui avancer parce que l'éducation nous a vraiment reculé, nous ne vraiment pas apprendre rien. Et l'année a fini, ça veut dire nous finissons avec une année dégringolée. Ça veut dire nous apprenons rien vraiment. Ça m'a demandé, c'est que pour nous la mettre main, pour nous qui j'en ai aidé les gens à avancer, puis à l'école, puis à travailler parce que l'éducation nous est vraiment pas stable. Parce que nous presque pas apprendre rien vraiment durant une année. Et l'année a passé vite, l'année a fini, nous pas apprendre rien. Si tu élèves 9e qui peut le composer, les composés examen l'état nous pas compte rien vraiment. Nous presque pas travailler rien parce que les pour travail, bandit empêche de travail, so y a tiré, caoutchouc a boulé, on peut problème faire nous pas travailler vraiment. M'a demandé pour tout le monde qui là ka aider nous pour nous faire gens pour tout le monde qui travaille l'école. Puis ka jeune sécurité côté de travail qui est content, côté puis ka plus soucier de étudier vraiment. Moi j'aime moi ça, c'est comme si presque pas de vie encore parce que si nous même jeunes avenir pays nous pas faire rien nous la caille nous pas rien à faire nous pas à l'école des difficultés je pense que ça vraiment comment son bagage pas comprendre Mesaj map bay ti moun yo, map di yo pi yo toujou bo etudyo serye, même si yo ak à l'école, pi yo toujou etudye, pi yo ka travay, pi yo ka avanse nan program yo.
But again, a story of resilience. Again, a reminder, colleagues, that Samar is only 15 years old. She's UNICEF's Goodwill Ambassador. And again, her message of resilience to ensure that despite extremely difficult circumstances, I heard part of her intervention where she was talking about kids going to school, taking the exams, given the sporadic educational services, it's really presenting serious challenges for the kids to finish their education and obtain their degrees. So a big thanks to Samar for her resilience and for the message of hope that she's relaying to the people and the children of Haiti. And with that, I'd like to turn to Susanna Tkalek, who is the Deputy Humanitarian Coordinator for the Democratic Republic of the Congo. Susanna, thanks again for joining us. And here we'd like you, Susanna, to speak to us about the situation in the DRC. And with the escalation of violence and insecurity, what are the key challenges faced in protecting education in Eastern DRC? It would be great here also, Susanna, to shed light on what is being done to protect children's rights to education. Over to you, please, Susanna.
Thank you, Marvat. Thank you, colleague. It's really a great privilege to be able today to talk to you. So, as Marvat said, I am speaking to you today from Goma, which is the capital of Northern Kivu. And as you know, the Democratic Republic of the Congo is facing one of the most complex and protracted crises in the world. I mean, we are entering now the 30th year, and the focus of all the conflict, or the majority of the conflict, is in 3 provinces in the east. So you can just give a bit of few data. Since March 2022, we have seen really an escalation of violence due to the activation of the M23, which is an armed group. And at the moment, we have almost 7 million internally displaced people in the east. 2.6 million are children. And out of this number, at least 1.5 million are of school age and are in urgent need of education. As you can imagine, the conflicts in the east, and so protracted, are severely undermining the future of its children and youth. More vulnerable, they suffer from various physical and psychological abuses and violation of their basic rights, such as the right to go to school and the right to shape their own future. I had the opportunity to meet few of them and to talk to them. And what I would like to do today is actually to share with you the stories, what they told me. I met Dieudonné in Beni. This is one of the cities in the grand north of Kivu. One day, he told me, while he was at school, his entire family, who was working in the fields, were killed by one armed group. Orphan and left to take care of himself, he ended up joining the very same armed group that has killed his entire family. It took him 4 years of continued abuse before he managed to finally escape. Dieudonné was placed in an orientation center that helps children demobilized from armed groups. I met him in one of these very centers where he's learning life skills, literacy and numeracy in order to prepare him to be reinserted in his community and lead a normal life. Dieudonné is slowly regaining his childhood. He loves playing football. But how many more children are still recruited and held hostage by armed groups? How many will never have Dieudonné's opportunity to rebuild his own life? It is difficult in DRC to quantify with precision the number of children enrolled in armed groups in the East. But the monitoring and reporting mechanism for 2022 and 2023 indicates a 20% increase in the number of children recruited and used by armed groups in the East. This is a very worrying trend. In 2023, partners have rescued and assisted 7,000 recruited children. But this is only the very tip of the iceberg. Another story. I met Esther in one of the many sites for displaced people in Goma. I just want to give you one more idea. We have 700,000 people recently displaced as of February this year in the new way in and around the city of Goma. So for those, in Europe, 700,000 people is the entire population of Montenegro. So you can imagine, over a very short period of time, this amount of people being forced to move, abandon everything what they have behind. Esther's story is actually a quite sad story. And it's a story, that I've heard over and over and over again by many of the girls and young women in Goma. She told me that she used to be a very happy and passionate student, loving going to school. She dreamt of becoming a doctor until the day that she was gang raped by armed men on her way home from school. Esther explained to me that she, like many other girls and women in DRC, was rejected by her family and community soon after her rape. As her village came under attack, she fled with nothing but the clothes that she was wearing. Alone, she was an easy prey and was quickly put to work in one of the hundreds of brothels in and around IDP sites in Goma. There she joined many other girls and women obliged to sell sex to survive for as little as 50 cents. A recent survey has also shown that the average age of the girls working in this brothel is 17, with as young as 12 being working there. Esther is one, however, of the fortunate ones. She entered the vocational training program we run and is benefiting from psychological support and accompaniment. Little by little, she might be able to rebuild her life and heal. But how many more girls and boys will not have the same opportunity? How many more will be left alone to care for the children born out of abuse, rejected, vulnerable, and unable to exit this vicious circle of poverty and abuse? Finally, I would like to share one last testimony with you. This is the story of Bahati, whom I met in one of the many IDP sites on the outskirts of Bunia in Ituri. Blind, he came to me to share his despair and never having had the chance to study. Neither in his hometown, nor now in displacement, there is education on grade. Displacement added an additional level of hardship to his desire to learn, be independent, accepted, and take charge of his life. Conflict and forced displacement exacerbate the shortcomings of an already weak education system and make it so much harder to provide children with appropriate schooling. In a conflict context, such as this in DRC, children are likely to drop out of school, either because their school is in a conflict zone, it's occupied by armed elements or internally displaced people, or ultimately destroyed. In 2023 alone, more than 800 schools have closed their doors for the reason I just mentioned earlier on. And this affected the schooling of nearly 500,000 children. Unable to attend school, children in Eastern DRC are inevitably exposed to increased protection risks, such as recruitment by armed groups, child labor, gender-based violence, early marriage, teenage pregnancies, or otherwise exploited and abused, deprived of education and a better future. Given the immensity of needs in such a huge country as the DRC, whose surface area is equivalent to the size of Western Europe, humanitarian partners are constantly constrained to prioritize and reprioritize their intervention, both geographically and by sector. The education sector in DRC is unfortunately always on the lowest level of funding in the HRP. I want to give you an example. In 2023, we asked for $95 million and received 16 million for education. It goes without saying that the education sector needs more funding. Even more, and even more important, it must be recognized as an essential emergency response and life-saving activity. Whenever we talk to people affected by conflict and displacement and ask the question, what your priorities are, education for their children comes among the top ones. Now, what are we prioritizing? The response in areas with the largest displaced population, where many of the schools are currently being used as shelters. Some children are enrolled in schools with host communities. For others, we are setting up temporary or semi-permanent classrooms. There is a challenge, however, for placing temporary classrooms, as all sites are heavily congested and there is very limited space available. We advocate with the authorities for more space, for more schools. We also provide children with school supplies and teachers with learning and recreational materials and psychosocial support. For displaced children who have lost education for several months or even years, like for example in Rutshuru, where children have missed up to 5 years of education, 2 years during the COVID pandemic, and then 3 more years during or under occupation. We enroll them in recovery classes for at least 3 months, and we are trying to pay particular attention to adolescents out of school girls, as they are one of the most vulnerable groups of children. Where schools were looted and occupied by armed groups or internally displaced people, we rehabilitate them before they can reopen their doors. I cannot tell you how many times we have rehabilitated and rebuilt the same schools in all those years of conflict. And ultimately, we do a very strong advocacy with the government to comply with the commitment toward the Safe School Declaration to protect teachers, students, and schools from the worst effect of armed conflict. We repeat to them that education must never be used as a weapon of war. Last but not least, with the same level of engagement and advocacy we are having with all parties in the conflict, in order to make sure that they do respect humanitarian principles of humanity, neutrality, impartiality, and independence, and do not target, this assuring also the protected character of schools. As of the start of 2024, more than 1,000 schools in Eastern DRC were affected by conflict or disasters, or a combination of both, impacting the education of more than 900,000 pupils. Eastern DRC is facing a very concrete risk of losing a generation of children without an education. According to the DRC's Human Capital Index, Congolese children born today can expect to achieve only 37% of their full potential. It is our collective responsibility to do more to protect the right of children to education in times of conflict. Over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Susanna, and thank you for sharing. Thank you for sharing the extremely staggering reality and the facts about what is being faced by children in Eastern DRC. Again, you mentioned a 20% rise in the number of children that are being recruited. You talked about over 1,000 schools in 2024 that are affected by violence or conflict, amongst many other facts that are extremely alarming. You brought a different, of course, angle to the discussion today, which is the issue around of course, gender-based violence, sexual exploitation, the particular challenges that displaced communities and children are facing as a result of conflict and violence. And also highlighting again what the UN and partners with local actors are doing to address the expressed needs of communities to prioritize education, yet despite the expressed needs of communities, which we have heard over and over again, directly from communities or through various studies and that have been carried out, including the ones conducted by Ground Truth Solutions, the education sector remains one of the most underfunded sectors. So this is again an opportunity for colleagues that are online and beyond to make sure that we do the required advocacy to increase funding for education, in addition to doing everything that's possible on the advocacy front to address the protection challenges related to education and emergencies. Thank you, Susanna, and I'm sure again there will be quite a few comments and questions from colleagues online, but with that, I'm really glad that we have USG Virginia Gamba, who's again the SRSG for Children and Armed Conflict. Thank you so much, Ms. Gamba, for joining us today and for your patience while we turn to you. And here, Virginia, it would be really great to hear from you in terms of, again, the tools that are available to protect education from attacks. What is available? How can we hold parties and states to account when these challenges and attacks take place? And what type of support from IC members is expected to support you and your mandate? Over to you, please, Virginia.
Thank you very much. I want to thank all the previous speakers. It was very powerful. It helped me a lot. I took a lot of notes. So thank you for helping me do my work better by giving me the chance to hear you out. I really am grateful for that reason, and because I do believe that the work that the Interagency Standing Committee does is really crucial on for me, a strategic aspect of human security. As you know, my office is a bit drier. With the support of partners on the ground, we do monitor 6 grave violations against children in armed conflict. Some of them were mentioned specifically by Susanna. But we do monitor recruitment and use of children, rape and other forms of sexual violence against children, abduction of children, killing and maiming, attacks on schools and on hospitals, and denial of humanitarian access to children in situations of armed conflict. Attacks on education is monitored through attacks on schools and hospitals, which includes attacks on school infrastructure, students, and all education personnel. All of that is considered by us attacks. But also we look at threats of attack. In addition, while not identified as one of the 6 grave violations, we do report constantly on the military use of schools and the numbers and who the perpetrator of that military use of schools, because it is an issue of concern. It might not be a grave violation, but it's an issue of concern. The UN's Children and Armed Conflict Agenda possesses a multitude of tools for protecting children in conflict situations, most of which have been established by the Security Council through 13 Security Council resolutions. It, for example, has established a monitoring and reporting mechanism on the 6 grave violations against children, again briefly mentioned by Susanna. It also requested the Secretary General to list in the annexes to his annual report on children and armed conflict parties to conflict that commit one or more of the 6 grave violations. Only the denial of humanitarian access is not a trigger for listing as of today, but all the other ones can trigger a listing. And what the Security Council also did is that it called upon listed parties, those that figure in the annexes, to prepare action plans with the United Nations to end and prevent these grave violations. So there is an obligation, if you're listed, to engage with the UN to try to cease and desist on that violation and change your behavior. More recently, we had a new resolution, Resolution 2601 of the Security Council, where we reiterate the condemnation of attacks on schools, children, and teachers, and it urged parties to conflicts to put an immediate end to such violence and to safeguard the right of children to education. So these tools and instruments have delivered results. Let's talk some of the good news. To date, over 40 action plans have been signed with armed parties to conflict, 5 of which contain specific measures to end and prevent attacks against schools and are currently under implementation. 3 of those 5 were signed with armed groups in the Central African Republic. 1 has been signed with the government of South Sudan, and finally 1 has been signed with the Houthi armed group in the Yemen recently. Prevention plans in the Philippines and in Ukraine have also been signed and include aspects on preventing attacks on schools and or prevention of the military use of schools. The Safe Schools Declaration has to date been endorsed by 119 countries, and some, such as Colombia, Mali, and Nigeria, have taken some steps to domesticate it in their national legislations. We also have some conflict-affected countries that have dared to criminalize, which is our best option, in their domestic legislation, attacks on schools. And here I have to commend the Central African Republic for doing that, and also the Philippines that have really domesticated and criminalized the 6th grade violations, but particularly attacks on education and on schools. But these are very few successes. That is a big reality that you have all expressed. Attacks on schools and their use for military purpose have continued unabated last year, disrupting education of tens of thousands of boys and girls in countries you've heard, such as Afghanistan, Burkina Faso, the Democratic Republic of the Congo, Israel, and the occupied Palestinian territories, Mali, Somalia, and Syria. Of course, Haiti, hundreds of schools were not operational due to attacks, threats of attacks, and general insecurity, and this has really deprived children of an education, further exposing them to violence, because a child not in school is more exposed to violence than otherwise. Attacks that were confirmed and verified by United Nations officials resulted in damages and the entire destruction of education facilities. But we've also been able to verify attacks that included abduction of students and the killing of students and of education personnel that tried to defend students. Similarly, in Cameroon, teachers were abducted, they were injured, they were killed on their way to school, not even reaching the school, just because they were teachers. And in Ukraine, hundreds of schools were damaged or destroyed, mostly through the extensive use of explosive weapons with wide area effects. For us, education is not only a fundamental right for boys and girls, but also an essential element for sustainable peace. Conflict-affected children can find in schools a safe place where they can learn and escape from violence. Schools also play an important role in contributing to the prevention of other violations and abuses against children, such as sexual violence, child marriage, child labor, trafficking in children, or recruitment into armed forces and groups. And we saw some examples in what people were saying. The scale and devastating impact on children of such attacks on their education underscore the urgent need to do more. Let me highlight a few measures that I believe are particularly important to strengthen our action to better protect education from attack. First, the international legal framework ensuring child's rights to education, including the Convention on the Rights of the Child, must be fully implemented in times of peace, not just in war. All persons under the age of 18 should be recognized as children, as per the convention, and their inherent right to education must be ensured. So I think we have to join forces in sharing those specific messages to those that don't believe that the convention needs to be implemented. We need to implement the Convention of the Rights of the Child everywhere, by everybody. Secondly, action plans with parties to conflict listed for attacks against schools in the Secretary General's annual report to the Security Council provide the United Nations with a crucial framework for engagement with perpetrators. The adoption and implementation of such action plans, as well as measures to prevent attacks on schools, can be promoted by your respective organizations in their interactions with parties to conflict. I have tried repeatedly to engage the Taliban, for example, on agreeing on signing a joint action plan to protect girls and the rights to education. I mentioned it already. Another thing we can do is that the United Nations Security Council Resolution 2601 makes explicit the links between education, peace, and security, and calls for a strengthening of coordination and cooperation among member states and relevant UN agencies, as well as regional and international partners regarding education in armed conflict. And to that end, my office and UNESCO have joined forces, and we are developing a guide for teachers to support children who were formerly associated with armed forces or groups to reintegrate into their communities. I would welcome your support in rolling out this guide once finalized. We intend to roll it in South Sudan and Yemen first, but we welcome your opinion. Last but not least, the Safe Schools Declaration represents a key tool to protect schools in conflict situations. I welcome the broad support garnered by the declaration, 114 members, and I invite you to join efforts to call on member states who have not yet done so to sign it. However, endorsement does not mean much for conflict-affected children if it's not immediately implemented. Governments must prioritize the protection of education in their national policies, strategies, and budgets. They must allocate sufficient resources to support education in times of peace, but also, and more so, in times of conflict. And they must work with all relevant stakeholders to ensure that the declaration translates into meaningful change. So to sum up and finish, as you can see, the tools in our toolbox are numerous, but what is needed is that these frameworks and measures be prioritized, operationalized, and adequately funded. We must work together to restore hope to children affected by conflict, ensuring that they have access to an education that is safe, free from violence, and offers them a chance of a brighter future. So thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you, Virginia. And I think you concluded your remarks with a very clear message. It is not due to a lack of tools and global norms and obligations that attacks against schools and children and personnel, education personnel takes place. There is a strong call to ensure that we translate policies and commitments to action. So the message is very, very loud and clear, and very promising to know that there are monitoring and reporting mechanisms in place. This is the first step in terms of holding perpetrators to account. So thank you for highlighting this. And I think also your message around the need to ensure that the Convention of the Rights of the Child must be implemented, not just in time of conflict and war, but it needs to be also put into effect and also implemented during times of peace. Many thanks again, Virginia, for your interventions, and also for sharing some of the positive developments, including those from the Philippines, where attacks against schools have been criminalized and have been included as part of national legislation. This is precisely the types of examples and best practices that we need to speak more about, and with the hope and that many more nations and member states will follow suit. So with that, colleagues, I'd like to open for questions and comments from our participants online. Please use the chat box. We are monitoring the chat box. We are receiving your questions so that we can direct them to our panelists. And I'd like to perhaps kickstart by turning first to Lisa Chung-Bender, who's the new director of the Global Coalition to Protect Education from Attack, to kickstart our Q&A session. Over to you, please, Lisa.
Thank you so much, Mervat. On average, there are 6 attacks on schools or instances of military use of schools every day. GCPA's flagship report has profiled 28 severely impacted states. 20 of these have active humanitarian response plans. We'd like to see the issue of protecting education become a priority for every humanitarian country team. Mina and Samar, your experiences are a powerful call to action for all of us. Indeed, 119 countries have endorsed the Safe Schools Declaration, and this is a strong reflection of our beliefs as a global community that schools must be safe. But now is the time to demonstrate our values by acting on these commitments. Schools must be protected. As a coalition, we understand that everyone has a role to play in monitoring, reporting, and responding to attacks on education. We must all do more together to advance prevention efforts and accountability. Special Representative Gamba, the wins you noted are so important for showcasing what can work and pointing the way for change. GCPA has a growing body of evidence of what works to prevent and respond to attacks on education, beginning with community-led responses, including policy advice for governments and operational recommendations for militaries and armed groups. Mina and Susanna, it's essential to underline the messages that you've emphasized on protecting girls. We're advancing research on the intersection of climate change. We're looking at attacks on children with disabilities and how explosive weapons impact them. I want to thank Yasmin. Education Cannot Wait is one of our leading partners in investigating data and reporting, ensuring that we all have a clear view of the scope, scale, and severity of attacks on education. This growing global problem demands collective action. Thank you to our esteemed panelists for speaking up for the millions of youth who are being denied their right to education. And Mina and Samar, know that we're watching, we're reporting, we're speaking out. We are with you. Thank you.
Thank you, Lisa. And just to note that our colleague from ICRC also expresses his support and stands ready to offer legal reading of the Safe School Guidelines, as well as to provide technical advice to all interested parties. So thanks again for ICRC for stepping forward and offering that support. There's also a comment coming in. Can we speak more about the role of peacekeeping operations in protecting education and how to fill this gap when peacekeeping operation missions end? So perhaps, again, Susanna, I'll shortly turn to you. I'll just give you a few minutes to perhaps reflect on that question, and we'll come to you shortly with a response. But also other panelists, Yasmin, Virginia, Mina, feel free to come in also on this question. What more can be done at a system or policy level to have education in emergencies recognized for its life-saving capabilities and ensure its inclusion in country-based pool funds for rapid response? Noting that education is often the least funded cluster in emergency contexts and rarely included in rapid response. Again, a point, Susanna, that you've highlighted. So can we perhaps, colleagues, kickstart with these two questions, maybe turning first to Susanna on the questions about the peacekeeping operations, and then inviting other panelists to come in, and then turning to perhaps Yasmin and Virginia on the second question with regards to prioritizing education in emergency, especially in light of the challenges in funding education, the education cluster at the moment. So perhaps over to you first, Susanna, and then we'll turn to Yasmin and Virginia. Over to you.
Thank you. I'm going to say immediately, I'm not an expert on peacekeeping, and so my work has been always very much humanitarian, even now in DRC. However, a couple of comments on my side. Most of the activities that I have been mentioning right now are implemented by humanitarian partners, being local or international, UN agencies, sponsored program, or NGOs. And as you know, we have already started in 2020 with the withdrawal of peacekeeping mission from several of the provinces in the east. Most recently, right now, there is the withdrawal of peacekeeping mission from South Kivu, so one of the three provinces in the east mainly affected by conflict. What we are doing together with mission colleagues is looking at how we can make a most responsible transfer of the work that they have been doing, either to the competent authorities, provincial authorities when it comes to education, but as well as how humanitarian partners can step in and provide their support in order to ensure that there is a continuity, progress, and impact when it comes to education. I mean, we will, as humanitarians and as development actors as well, we will be staying firmly in the eastern part and building on the successes of our peacekeeping mission, continue the work that they have started. I would like also to take just the opportunity to address the point raised in terms of financing and the humanitarian fund. In particular, we are always prioritizing both in SEF as well as in our humanitarian fund, education in emergencies. What we would like, however, and this is a challenge, I'm asking actually the question to everyone who is right now online, give us some good suggestion. Tell us also what are some really good examples that based on the context that I have shared, so a very fluid emergency context, people moving, being displaced multiple times, and children over a short period of time. I mean, I am just starting to recognize now and displace people from one zone in which we are working, then now moving to Goma. I was surprised. This has never happened in my entire career. That, I mean, I'm able to follow where the displaced people are moving and meeting them and talking to those children as well. So what we need as well is more innovative, more thoughtful, actually, education also type of initiatives that we would be very happy to continue to support as well. But please stay reassured, even if it is minimum or not enough the funds, there is no one allocation that doesn't look at education in emergencies. So I'll stop here. Thank you. Thank you, Mabel.
Thank you, Susanna, and thank you for speaking to your work in DRC and how you're also capitalizing on the pooled funds, the SURF and the country-based pool funds to make sure education is prioritized. Yasmin, would you like to come in with your thoughts, please?
Thank you very much, Mervat, and thanks, Susanna, and thanks all of you. I'd like to go back just quickly on peacekeeping, because I've been working in peacekeeping operations. I think it depends, because I saw the question also in the chat, it depends on whether the peacekeeping mission in DRC is under Chapter 7, because then they can use force to protect civilians, the protection of civilians, and that means civilians' objects, such as schools. I'm not saying that it's been successful so far in the history of the UN, but there is a chapter in the charter that allows them to step in. I know that DRC may have had a Chapter 7 mandate before. I don't know if they have it today, but if they have a Chapter 7 mandate, in principle, in theory, they should be able to protect school children, teachers, and schools. But that can also lead to a lot of casualties, so it's a very debated issue. But there is a possibility. I wanted to answer that question. When it comes to country-based pool funding, and it's important also for Susanna to know, because we have invested heavily in DRC, and for me, Mina, to know that we have heavy investments also in Afghanistan, and we do a lot of advocacy for the girls of Afghanistan. We have even been there trying to speak to the Taliban. We had an all-women mission there just when they came to power. But when it comes to the role of the humanitarian coordinator or the arresting coordinator, often the same person with two hats, education cannot wait. We will come in with seed funds. So let's say we come in to DRC with the second phase of our multi-year program or first emergency response. It's seen as seed funds. So let's say ground total of a program is 100 million. We might put 30 million or 40 million. The expectation, or if it's a first emergency response of 2 or 3 million, we might put 1 million or 1.5. The expectation is always, and we say that in our cover letter, is that the humanitarian or resident coordinator should then utilize the seed funds to mobilize resources from in-country donors, including using country-based pool funding. And I do know that the terms of reference for the humanitarian coordinators, sometimes you have to allocate X number or so much to gender equality or girls, you have to so much to protection. And I understand that during Mark Lukoff's time, because we engaged a lot with him, particularly on this, that during that time he also inserted in the terms of reference of humanitarian coordinators that they have to allocate funding to education. That was one way for us to get to systematize this, so that we don't rely on the goodwill on each humanitarian coordinator, but it's actually part of the TORs. So just to bear in mind, whenever Education Cannot Wait makes an investment, we expect the humanitarian coordinators to allocate, and obviously ideally a minimum of 10% from the in-country humanitarian pooled funds or any other envelopes towards education, because education needs to be part of the humanitarian response. Thereof the name Education Cannot Wait Until the Conflict is Over. It needs to come immediately alongside water, sanitation, food, and all other life-saving needs. But we do consider education life-saving as well. And as you said so well, Susanna, right now, Eastern DRC, it's going to be critical for all these internally displaced children and their families moving around. That can go on for a very long time. And if they don't go to school, they're going to lose 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, 10 years. And we know that the conflict in DRC is a protracted one. And we have also, and I fully agree, the education cluster is so very important. And one reason that ECW started off, one of the first reasons, one of the first actions we took were to actually support the education cluster, because it had been disregarded. Everyone was wondering, why is not education in emergency getting funding? Well, no one is paying attention to the education cluster. And that is our coordination mechanism. And it's been there for a long time, and we need to empower them. So we are actually investing in the global education cluster to build capacity of the education cluster in non-refugee situations. I need to make a point that where you have an overwhelming majority of refugees, it's UNHCR that is responsible in the working group for the coordination. So we are investing in the cluster because that is the coordination mechanism in a humanitarian setting or in the UNHCR refugee coordination cluster. 2 more points, and then I probably won't say more today because I know we're coming to an end. But for everything that Virginia and you have said, Mervat and Susanna and Mina and all of you, I think the biggest problem we have is the compliance gap. We can draft conventions and declarations forever, but if there is no compliance and we let impunity just get away with it, not only are we destroying the international legal framework to protect schools and the Safe School Declaration, but we are destroying the lives of the children and the teachers and so forth. But we're destroying a world order that is based on the rule of law rather than the rule by force. We need to address impunity. Yes, is it political? Yes, it shouldn't really be, because everyone should be equal before the law, should be no political considerations, independence of the judiciary. But the problem is that they treat international law and the Safe School Declaration, they treat it as if it's just another paper. I have my war goals, I do whatever I want. And we see it every day right in front of our eyes. That takes political leadership. We have it in the United Nations, but it takes political leadership amongst our member states. They have to rise up to the occasion to stand by their commitment, whether it's the Safe School Declaration or humanitarian law. Finally, good news. I'm happy to have something good to say and happy to say. And that is that today, Education Cannot Wait, through our acceleration window, we are announcing a 3-year, $500,000, $500,000 grant to GCPEA, and this is we have supported GCPEA since 2018, and today we are announcing the grant for another 3 years. We have huge respect and welcome on board Sarah Binder as well. It's good to see you, but we have a huge respect for GCPEA. You are unique. You're doing a distinct kind of work, and it's thanks to you that we can do advocacy while you are also doing great advocacy. And congratulations to get 119 member states on board. Closing the compliance gap, I think that's the work of all of us collectively, the entire UN system, the entire civil society. Civil society has an immense role to play in that. But I'm at least happy that we can continue to support the great work of GCPEA. Thank you.
Super. Thanks so much, Yasmin. I will take this as your closing remarks. It's a strong way to conclude your interventions. And thanks for sharing the good news as well. And we all stand behind, of course, GPCA. And thank you for your commitment and for this important announcement. Perhaps just doing the rounds and turning first to Virginia, any additional responses to the questions that came in and any concluding remarks before we turn to Mina with the final words. Over to you, please, Virginia.
Thank you very much, and thank you for these lots of very good ideas and solutions. I think we have to be a little bit bolder and a little bit more creative than what we are doing. I think really, if we want to protect education from attack, we also need to have data about attacks on education. And this is the single biggest threat to draw down and draw back missions, for example, of peacekeeping operations in situations of armed conflict, because once they're gone, the data, the possibility of understanding the dynamics are really very much reduced, as well as the possibilities for engaging with parties to conflict on stopping attacks on schools. So this is one of the biggest problems. I think where I find the greatest amount of possibilities for the future is in one simple fact. We might talk about education in emergencies, which we have extensively done. I think it is proven that education is a life-saving assistance to both families and children, frankly, and to all displaced people particularly, because education does promote the idea of normalcy, and it is a safe space intellectually for children to escape the ravages of displacement and of war and of fear. But we're not thinking strategically. Education, in my mind, is the single only cross-cutting issue in the nexus between protection, prevention, peace and security, post-conflict reconstruction, and development. It is the single issue that across all of the pillars of the dynamics of conflict and peace makes sense, because it helps in emergencies, it reinforces peace, it brings reconciliation, it allows for post-conflict reconstruction, and it ensures development for all of the community. So I think what we need to do is recognize education as a strategic cross-cutting issue that makes sense across the whole of the spectrum of the human condition in peace and war. I think I would like to see this expressed in the Pact of the Future. We are not mentioning children in the Pact of the Future, and I don't think we're giving the strategic importance to education as a solution, a tool that is efficient. With one back, you actually do 5 different things that will result in stability and peace in the future. I think we need to be more innovative as to education initiatives where we might consider express education for express needs. We need to start deconstructing the different tools that are used in education through primary and secondary school and identifying the key things we need to promote first. I think we're being too tied to money. I don't think money is the answer of everything. Let me give you an example. We need to coordinate and complement all our support differently. I negotiated in Ethiopia when I was trying to do a joint action plan that the government prioritized the demining of schools before the demining of fields. There are little things like that where we can choose where we start. And right now, we're not using schools as the centrality of where to start. I think this is something that we could do a lot more. I also think I have negotiated in Mali that the fact when there was peace and there was demining, the schools were released, they were no longer militarized in some cases. But what happened? There were no teachers because there was no safety to teachers, so no one wanted to take the employment in those places. I think we also have to understand that we need to provide safety of teachers and incentives for them to go to these very challenged areas. And we might consider a global free academic pool where all universities in the planet should give for free services of education, both digitally and not to schools. We just need to be a bit more creative. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Virginia. Very, very helpful. Again, education is a strategic cross-cutting issue. And again, innovation in education, express education for express needs. So with that, maybe turning to Mina for her final remarks. And again, Susanna, I'll also take your earlier responses as also final remarks, if you don't mind, in the interest of time as well. Over to you, please, Mina.
Thank you so much for all the remarks you made, for all the information you shared. I'm majoring in peace and conflict studies, so most of my opinions come from experience living in Afghanistan and in a war zone, going to school. But I just as a last remark, I want to emphasize more on thinking more strategically about, like why we cannot provide education and like how interconnected education is to other issues in a society. Because living in Afghanistan, even back then when girls were able to go to school, we had a majority, like I wouldn't say majority, but a large number of children could not go to school because of poverty, because of unemployment issues. So just learning more about the root causes, I think, can help us a lot on finding solutions to what we can do. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mina. And I really, again, a big thanks to you, to Samar, to Virginia, to Yasmin, to Susanna for joining us today, and of course for all of our participants. I have to really conclude by saluting Mina and Samar and all of the children across the various contexts that are persevering, that are showing courage and resilience to ensure that they have the right to obtain education despite all of the challenges that they are facing. So first and foremost, a big thanks and big word of appreciation for the courage of children across the various contexts that we spoke about today and beyond, for really standing firm to make sure that you continue to receive the needed education. But I think also the message is very clear. We need compliance. We need to hold perpetrators to account. We need to celebrate the good successes, such as the one, Virginia, that you mentioned with the Philippines, criminalizing attacks against education. We need to do more as an international community and in our respective roles to advocate, to ensure that such attacks, such violations are put to a stop. We need to continue to speak on this issue, and I'm committed from my end, from the IASC, that I'll do everything that I can from my end to ensure that we put the spotlight on this issue. And of course, the point, and I think it came out very clearly from the interventions, but also the comments in the chat, financing, funding of the education sector. Of course, we're talking about funding of the education sector as a whole, but also when it comes to funding to ensure that we're able to do more to protect children, facilities, and education personnel to make sure that we continue to provide the required rights for children to obtain education. Many thanks again to all of you. And once again, Yasmin, thank you for making the announcement today. And we look forward to joining us at the next IASC briefing, which we will announce again shortly. And a big thanks for the colleagues that are working behind the scenes, including Menti and Merlinda from the IASC Secretariat, who made this possible. Thanks again, everyone, and wishing you a good afternoon. Thank you.